So last week we did a ExpressPCB schematic entry. You guys got your hands on another PCB creation tool. This week we're going to complement that with generating the layout from the schematic that you created last week. Rather than have you dig up yours, and you can use yours, but if you don't have a lot of confidence in yours, what you can do is download the flashlight schematic that I put into Blackboard into a folder that you've got on your desktop. In order to open that up, you don't want to double click on it, because right now if you look at that icon, it looks like it's going to try to open up an eagle. So what I'll do is open up PCB ExpressPCB, the layout tool, the schematic tool. So I'll open that one first, and then open this file here that I've got on my folder. That's on my desktop. Okay. And now I'll open up the ExpressPCB tool, which is under the same folder, ExpressPCB. Okay, so now what I'm going to do, this is a little bit different than Eagle. In Eagle, I would simply save this, export to a board file. That isn't going to work with ExpressPCB. So what I'm going to have to do is begin pulling components down into my layout field. And I've got all these different components to pull from. I need a bunch of capacitors. So it's similar to last week. If you don't want to follow this video, there's a help quick start guide that'll pretty much walk you through anything you'll need to know in ExpressPCB. The lab is also fairly explicit. You probably can get by without watching the video. What you're going to do by the end of the lab is copy the schematic over. That's a piece of cake. And then I want you to copy your own fully constructed board layout over into a Word document and then submit that. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and you can follow along or not. So what I'm going to do is pull a bunch of components into here, and then when I get them in here, I have to give them names that match exactly the way they are in the schematic. And then afterward I'm going to link them. But right now I just need to, for instance, this capacitor has to be called C1 if I'm going to use that for my C1 capacitor. So I double click on that component, name it C1. For the resistors, I'll scroll down to get my resistor component. Double click on it, R1. Okay, so go ahead and do that for all of them. One note is that the two chips in here are actually one chip. It's just the same function twice over. So if you note here, the pins go from 1, 2, 3 up to 14. So you need a 14 pin dip. Where is it? Dip 14. All right. Get all those in there. So when you've got everything pulled down, Note that I've gone through here and checked that every component that I have is matched with a component that I pulled into here and named. For instance, this D, this diode, is this D over here in my schematic. The actual parts, I specified which ones you could bring in here. So the capacitors are 0.4 inch spacing, the resistors are 0.4. In this particular case it's not that important, but if you were actually doing it, these physical attributes would have to match what you actually have in your hand in terms of a component. So the last thing that we need here is, we didn't create this B1, this battery, so I'm going to go back in here and I'm going to create a battery. And I'm going to make it sort of mimic an AA battery. So what I need to do is create a custom component. So I'm going to create a trace here, and when I start doing that, it's red. Now while you guys were doing this, I don't know if you noticed, but the red is the top copper layer, the green is the bottom copper layer, and if I want those visible I can click on those here. Well, clearly I don't want my battery outline to be copper. I want it to be yellow silkscreen. So click on these things here and you'll see these layers become visible or not. So this thing is, as I draw this, it's drawing it in the copper layer, and I don't want that. So what I'm gonna do is erase that one that I've got started here, and up here when I click on this, I get a choice of what layer I want to make this in. So I don't want it red, I don't want it green, I want it this yellow one. So I'm going to draw a rectangle, and this has to be the size of a AA battery. Okay, so I draw a rectangle, and now I'm going to put some pads in. One here, and now this pad, it may or may not be something that I want. Undo that one. When I double click on it, if I go up here to this arrow tool, I double click on my pad, and it tells me, it gives me a bunch of options for what I want. So if I don't want the default pad there, I want a bigger one, I can select one of these, and I'll call it pin number 1, and you notice that it just got bigger. So let's say this is going to be my positive pad. So now I just want to denote on the silk screen that this is positive. And this one is going to be negative. If I want to just reuse this one, I can just click on this again, or I can click on it and paste it, Control C, Control V, pasted it in the middle of the field. I'll bring it over here. Okay. AA battery. Okay, so these things are just a bunch of loose components now. I haven't grouped them yet. So when I'm all done with my battery, go to my arrow tool. I'm going to select everything that I just created. Oh, one more thing I forgot to do. This guy is called pin 1. This guy's got to be called pin 2. So now I'm going to select everything again. Group to make PCB component. And then I'll save it as a custom component, AA battery. So now if I ever needed to, now when I move it, all the components move together. And if I ever needed to go to my custom components, there's my AA battery. Okay, the one thing I haven't done yet is I haven't named it B1. So I need to name it B1. Double click on this component. B1. Okay. So now I have all the components that I need. Lay them out. Try not to take up too much space, as I have. And now what I'm going to do is link it, because right now there's no connection between this and my schematic. So what I'm going to do is go File, Link Schematic to PCB. It's going to say which schematic do you want to link it to. Find the schematic file. It's in my folder. Link to it. It's been linked. Okay. Now, when I click on these individual nodes, it tells me which ones they're connected to. And that's as good as you're going to get in PCB, ExpressPCB, where, as you recall, in Eagle, it allowed you to sort of wire everything at once. So now what I need to do is just make sure that I orient everything so that I minimize my wiring. So I'm going to flip a few things. And now I would wire. In this case, I don't want to wire in silkscreen. I want to wire on the bottom copper layer. And see if you can do this all on one layer. One last thing I wanted to show you guys. I tried myself to make this a single-sided board and was having some difficulty. So here's an example. I'm wiring up here on the bottom layer, and I'm on the net tool, and I'm going to connect these nodes. So this one is fairly easy. I get on the bottom layer. Okay, now I got to connect these two. So what if I lay a green wire? It intersects here. So what I'll do is I'm going to make a click, and the reason I made the click here, you see there's a little junction there, is now I can pull this one to the top layer. Okay, so what happened was it was a bottom layer, but I was going to intersect with this line, so I made a click here, and then I pulled it. With using the arrow key, I selected it and then pulled it up. So I am all done with my PCB layout, and you can see that I needed to do quite a bit of add a lot of vias. Vias are things that jump through from one layer to the next. So this would be a via. Looks a lot like the pads. If you wanted to see certain layers visible, oh, here it is down here. No silk screen. So there's my jumpers that I had to add. Most of the wiring is in the bottom layer. And that is it. So copy that into your Word document and submit. And that'll be it for this week. And next week we'll start AutoCAD. Bye-bye.